This week we want to talk about behavior. And I always feel a little funny whenever I talk about behavior and religion because instantly you sound like someone's sort of pesky old great aunt who's telling you what to do and what not to do. But behavior is a really important dimension of the switch towards spirituality that I'm talking about in the middle part of the book. Here in this section, I explore how these different questions are changing. So when we looked at belief last week, I talked about how we needed to move away from ideas about God, what we believe about God, towards how we believe it. What is our experience of these conceptions of God? How do we encounter God through our intellect and through our heart? When it comes to behavior, people have typically thought about behavior as how do you do it? Give me the list of rules, give me the program, tell me how to order my life, and I'll just make that happen. And if you follow these things, the rules or the order or the program, then you're going to figure out how to be a good Christian, how to be a good Sunday school teacher, and ultimately a lot of people think how you're going to get to heaven. One of the things that's really changing with behavior is, as I explained, it's a shift from how do you do that towards what do we do. And I think that is a really profound change. When I think about the people in my life who are talking about how or how they act as a Christian, the actions of the Christian life, very few people are asking for a manual or a 10-step guide, but instead are asking the question, what should I do? My daughter is 14 years old. She's at the stage now where the question is always, what am I going to do with my life? What's ahead for me? And she wants to figure out what the universe holds. But it's not just 14-year-olds. It's 14-year-olds, and then it's college students who are trying to figure out what they're going to do with their lives, or young couples who are trying to figure out what their vocation is and what it means to be in a family. And there are people who are in the fullness of their lives as working in the working world, and they're saying, well, what am I doing here? What is this all about? And retirees. I have a father-in-law who's 88 years old, and at 88, he's still asking himself the question, what am I going to do? The question has shifted from give me the rules towards that what question, which is a question of meaning. It's a question of vocation. It's a question of discernment. What is it that God wants us to do? And it's a question that can be sort of complex too, because it's not just what does God want you to do as an individual, but the question for a community is what does God want us to do? And there should be a sort of a clause on the end of the question, what does God want us to do for the world, for the poor, for the sake of the planet? So it's not simply a sort of a navel-gazing question, but instead, what are we going to do is always a question that leads us outside of the church building. It leads us outside of ourselves and causes us to meet our neighbor in a new and different way. So in this whole section, I talk about an idea that I've talked about in other books of mine, the idea that Christian behavior is primarily an issue not of programmatic actions, but instead is an issue of practice. And a practice is a thing that you do over time, and that Christians do in order to encounter God in their lives for the sake of the world. So these are these actions that we do over and over and over again, and we do them because Christian people in the past have done them, and because they produce in us, frankly, the fruit of the Spirit. They produce in us mercy, goodness, kindness, justice, all of the things that the New Testament points towards as the things that are supposed to be our character. And as we do them, we get better and better at them over time. And so that's what Christian practices are. And they're things like prayer, hospitality, worship, offering forgiveness, doing charity. Those are Christian practices. And they're divided up into sort of the practices of the soul, the things that shape us in our inner lives, and then practices of ethics, the things that plunge us more deeply into the world. There is a huge literature of practice, and many churches in the last decade have become acquainted with that literature. It's also a very sort of what I would call a fertile area of theological study right now. So a lot of young priests, ministers who have gotten out of seminary in the last decade have probably had classes around the theology of practice and how to engage practices in congregations. So a lot of what I say in this section isn't, I would say, particularly new. But what I'm trying to do here is to sum it up into maybe some new language and a different way of thinking about it. So the shift of the questions is a very important thing for congregations and individuals to engage. I urge people to stop asking the bishop's office, how are we going to execute this particular program? You know, give us a rule book or give us a guide to doing evangelism. But instead, really, as a community, think about that question, what are we going to do? What is God calling us uniquely to do that no other congregation in our town or our part of the diocese can do? And there is something that every one of us has that we do that is unique to us as individuals, and there is something that you as a community that's unique to you as a community. So you need to discern those things, and then you need to do them. Because that's the thing that's so interesting about practice, is that in a sense, if you had a program, you just sort of pull a book off the shelf and you read the book and you say, oh, we can do that, and then you do these 10 things, and then you close the book and it's all over. But with practice, you got to do it. And you have to do it over and over and over again. It's like learning to play the piano or a musical instrument or playing tennis or whatever it is that if you are going to become good at something, whether that thing is hitting a tennis ball or playing the violin or serving hungry people, you have to do it in a repeated way in a community where there are people who are good at it and where there are people who are just learning it. So you have to actually have a learning community with mentors and people who are newcomers to the practice together, where they are sharing in the practice. And as they move together doing this thing, everyone gains confidence and skill in doing it better and better. So practice is something that you don't just get from a book. You can't just follow 10 steps. You have to do it well. To do it well, you have to do it with other people. And that even includes prayer. I think it's really fascinating that if you're going to learn how to pray or learn even some of the great mystical practices of the church, you need to have a mentor and a teacher. You cannot sit down in a dark room with a candle and all of a sudden become a master at prayer. You have to have somebody who helps to guide you in that practice. So you have to do them in community, you have to have mentors, you have to have teachers, and you have to take the time to do it. And some people get nervous about that. But I always love to remind people that practice isn't something you do when you're good. Practice is the thing you do to become good. And so that to me is probably one of the most important things for congregations to keep in mind right now, is that there are very few places in our culture to be a community of practice. And church is one of the places that we do have left, where people of differing skills can come together around a common activity in which they feel a sense of passion to which they're called, and they can teach one another how to serve the world. And if it doesn't happen in church, I don't know where that can happen.